Welcome back, everyone. Now, I'm very excited to introduce you to our next event, and that is the Talkscript with the TypeScript team. So let's bring the team up.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
So this is the Talkscript with the TypeScript team panel. I am Torrey Rice. I'm a partner at SitePen. I'm a user experience designer by trade, which makes me once again highly unqualified for the fourth year running to be interviewing the TypeScript team. Right next to me, you can see Nick Nisi. He is he is a software engineer and aspiring tech skit actor from Nebraska.
Hoi hoi.
Also joining us, you don't need to talk. They know who you are. You've been doing this all day long. Nice background, though. Looks like you found a new room to sit in. Did you find the interview room? All right, good. I'm glad.
Game's
I'm
over.
glad we got that all cleared up this
Now
morning. Yeah. We have Anders. Let's just try to get. We'll do it from the top. Are we live? Okay, can't do it from the top. All right. We have Anders. You know what? I'm just going to keep in tradition and keep messing up your name. Anders is a Microsoft Technical Fellow, and as I understand it, has written some code before. You can wave in case I don't know who you are. I want to. Yeah. Daniel is the program manager on the TypeScript language. Daniel loves programming as well as long walks on the beach. And Ryan is the last person, so he doesn't need to wave, but you can if you want. He is the engineering lead for TypeScript and has been working on it since Obama was just starting his second term. That's how I like to quantify everything nowadays, really. So this is Talkscript, which is also a podcast, confusingly named. And you can subscribe to it wherever you get your podcasts, as long as those places are Apple, Spotify, or Google. Or if you don't use any of those services, you could just go to Talkscript.fm and you can, listen and subscribe. But again, only through those services. All right. Well, let's just get into it. Let's see. Last year, we were dealing with murder hornets, politicians riling up their base to undermine democracy, and a pandemic with no end in sight. But that was last year. This year, well, Steve from Blue's Clues just said he was really proud of us, so that we have that going for us this year. That's what we're doing this year. I got nothing else. I was looking for anything positive. You guys doing anything like baking or playing disc golf or anything? Like, what have you guys been up to this last year in the pandemic?
Baking.
Baking.
I haven't seen a murder hornet around here.
That's a positive.
I just read recently that they found one there. They found a nest recently.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah. So just because you didn't see it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It's real. Just like wealth and equality and all the other things. Okay, so we'll just jump right into the hard-hitting questions then. Anders, in the past, I've asked you, let's see, what your spirit animal was and what your favorite language was. And today, I think, given that TypeScript is all about safety, I'm thinking, what's your favorite vaccine? I just assume you've had all of them. Like, which one was your favorite one? Moderna, Pfizer?
I'm not partial.
You're a Johnson & Johnson guy? Okay, all right. All right.
Well, I did get the Pfizer, but I don't get vaccinated often. But when I do, I get Pfizer.
Okay, yeah, that's good. I was all in on the bougie vaccine. I got Pfizer. I was super excited. I felt really privileged. And then I found out all of a sudden Moderna seems to be doing better. What's that about? Like, why did I get the crappy one? That's all I'm saying. But I guess I got one. So there's that. So anyway, it's been a good year for me. Obviously, as you can tell, I'm socially adjusted. Seriously, though, into the things that people are here to hear about, which is TypeScript. I guess I'll just jump in with the first real question, which is, do you want to read some English literature to people? Because I think there was a big demand for that in the chat room earlier. They said they would just listen to you read all day. So we could just do that, or we could do the show. I'm just going to leave that up to you.
Let's do the show.
Okay, to the show. Got it. Yeah, no, of course, you weren't prepared for that. After a decade of working on TypeScript, in your view, how have people's opinions on TypeScript changed over the last few years? It seemed like before there was a lot of maybe hesitancy or resistance to the idea of that, and now it seems like maybe that tide's turning, or maybe, I don't know. Like, what have you seen over the last few years?
Well, I think it's been a journey on a long arc, and I think many things have changed. People's perception have changed, but of TypeScript and of Microsoft, presumably too. I think, I mean, back 10 years ago when we started, people had a very different view of Microsoft, and rightfully so. I think we did not really know much about how to do open source, and our first attempts at open source were kind of clumsy. I remember, for a couple of years, TypeScript was on Codeplex, our open source repository, and it was kind of crickets there. There wasn't really a community. We weren't really doing the open development process. We were just sort of putting the code out and then doing work the same way we used to. And I think we've gotten a lot wiser over the years, and we've learned a lot. And I feel like that is a big part of why TypeScript is where it is today. I think at least we did realize early on that we were never going to succeed in this space unless we were open source. We just didn't know how to do it. But I think we had the right instinct, and I think it's played out. I mean, well, better than I ever imagined. I had never imagined that more than, I don't even know how many of the world's professional JavaScript developers today use TypeScript, but it's well over 50%. That to me was unfathomable when we first started this project. But it's wonderful, and it's what motivates us to keep doing this, year after year.
Yeah, and I think to that point, you mentioned that TypeScript started off on Microsoft's internal, or not internal, but code repository. And here we are 10 years later, and TypeScript is on Microsoft's code repository. It's just that
Yeah, not a lot.
you have really
I was gonna say, I
embraced.
don't think a lot's actually changed
True.
here. You guys.
True.
Yeah, but if you look at the ecosystem now, it's like, GitHub is a big part of that. That's where we put our code. We write our code in VS Code. I'm contractually obligated to say, except for me, in Vim. But you do use the language server, so it very much contributes to how I write code. And then the code that I pull down is from NPM, which also Microsoft. So really the ecosystem has, in a big part, especially in JavaScript, come back to Microsoft in that way. That wasn't really a question, though. I do have a question for you. And you get asked this every year. And I want to ask it again just to keep up consistency. But you always get requests for when or if TypeScript will ever run in the browser. And you always say no. And I just want to give you a chance to say no again.
Well,
I think
never say never. But go ahead. Well, Ryan has an answer, but
I'll maybe try a thoughtful answer. But the question of what it means to run TypeScript in the browser is what's interesting about it. And I had asked around on Twitter the other day, like, what does it mean to you to run TypeScript in the browser? And there were as many different answers as there were responses. So for some people, that means the types are checked while the code is running. And maybe that means, you turn it into a dynamic, you take a dynamic mechanism and turn it into a static mechanism. Other people think running TypeScript in the browser means that, well, it would be type checked ahead of time, like after all the JavaScript loads, like whatever that means in a browser context. Other people just think, oh, well, actually, I just want the browser to be the one who strips the comments instead of my build process because I'm running in some system that's free of the build process. Other people wanted, I don't know, there's like 1,000 different like bits you can twiddle on here, and you can come up with a billion different ways of like what it means to run TypeScript in a browser. I think the thing that we've seen have a little more traction lately is the idea of the browser ignoring the TypeScript parts of the syntax. So, if you in your browser said let x:string equals 42, the browser would be like, I don't know what colon string is. I don't care. We'll just proceed. And there would be no errors associated with that. There'd be no warnings. Be treated as if it were a comment, which, in JavaScript, all comments are like totally ignored. There's no semantics to them. And I think that approach has some promise. It's certainly like the easiest to reason about of anything we've heard about so far. There's proposals running there, but there's still also a lot of open questions. Like, what is TypeScript syntax? Well, like, we add new syntax almost every release in the type system. So you'd have to like put some kind of boundaries on, like, okay, if the browser isn't going to have TypeScript 4.7 built into it, right? It's going to have like some roughly rolling version of the language in it, and we'd need to make sure that anything that happens there is like done in an extensible or a future-proofed way, so that it's like, oh, I can write TypeScript 4.7 in the browser, but I can't write TypeScript 4.8 because I added this new keyword that doesn't quite parse right. So it's all very tricky. And never say never, I think, is the right answer at this point.
Yeah, we kind of have that with JavaScript now, like with new proposals coming in too. So it's not like completely unfounded to not be able to run the code that I'm trying to write. But yeah, I kind of agree. And that's why I wanted to ask this question to me, that seems like the most promising way forward. And I just really like that, like being able to kind of divorce the build system, but still get all of the benefits of the language server and like full types when I'm writing the code.
Yeah. And I think that is something that you're like seeing a lot more, or you've seen a lot more over the last few years, right? Like, you can run Babel as your compiler instead of TypeScript. You can use now SWC or ESBuild or whatever you want, right? Because ultimately the thing that we provide value is like finding out as you type that you've made a mistake, maybe like, you typoed something, you made a logic error, and you can still run your code really fast, right? So, we do get it. We get the use case. We want people to be able to like run their code fast and not have to like worry about your compile cycle every single time. And nowadays we are, friendlier for those sorts of tools too, right? Like, you don't need to have type information to like compile your entire app. We have more syntax constructs that help with this sort of thing. So I don't know. We're in a better position, but it's still just ideas kind of floating around right now. So.
Awesome. Great answers. Great to hear.
So, yeah, speaking of every year questions. So, Anders, every year someone asks a question about supporting WebAssembly, but this year nobody did. So my question is, do you want me to ask that question?
Well, actually, we had a great. I thought that the talk about like actually dynamically creating WebAssembly from a little mini DSL was super interesting. And I think that's a very appropriate use of WebAssembly. And I think the community has gotten better at understanding what WebAssembly is, because honestly, for a few years there, it was just sort of magic sauce that, of course, anything that rhymes with assembly, I must have it because it'll go faster, right? But it wasn't really clear to people that we're talking about a whole different abstraction level and a very different kind of program that you can run with some very unintuitive constraints. And I think that's gotten a lot clearer now, and so I think WebAssembly is finding a real place in the community, and we're seeing new and innovative uses all the time. So I'm bullish on WebAssembly. I just, for TypeScript to target WebAssembly is sort of nonsense, though. That's and I think that was what people were asking about, right? And that was why I had to answer that question several times. But I think less need to do that now.
So you're going to target WebAssembly is my takeaway. Write the tweets, everyone. Oh, nothing. I didn't say anything.
It's a little funny because like for years we got other questions before WebAssembly, right? Are you going to compile TypeScript to like native code, to like .NET bytecode? Are you going to compile it to whatever? And for the same reasons, like the answer is the same, which is there's not a really practical way of doing it or a reason to do it in some cases, and like maybe you can fathom some subset of TypeScript that does some stuff, right? Like static TypeScript made an appearance at TSConf a couple of years ago. That's a big, I mean, that's a much smaller subset of what you can do with JavaScript today. So you'd lose a lot of features if you try to do that.
Mhm.
All right. Earlier today, you mentioned better typing with try and catch a bit. Can you go into that a little bit deeper?
Yeah,
Sure. Oh, so do you want to go, Daniel? Yeah, go ahead.
well, I think that, I mean, Anders and I've talked about this a couple of times, even recently.
Oh, maybe done. Maybe done.
Oh, did Daniel disappear? All right. Well, but meanwhile, I suppose I can talk about it a little bit while we get Daniel back. Or should we wait?
I mean, honestly, don't pretend
Okay.
that you didn't just pay someone off, Anders, to go in there and do this. You didn't want him to speak, and we get it. It's okay. Like, this is your show. It's the Anders show, everyone.
Well,
Okay,
apparently we didn't pay enough. But yeah. Yeah. So the issue here is that the way JavaScript was designed, you can throw any value you care to as an exception. You can literally say throw 42 or throw a string or throw null or throw whatever you want to throw. Which in other words mean that in a catch, anything can be thrown at you, and therefore your catch variable really can have any type. Trying to statically analyze what types you might see in a catch is non-trivial, at least if you want the code to be sound. In fact, I'm not even sure that it's possible for it to ever be sound. You could probably dream up some sort of assertion system where functions assert that they only throw the following exceptions, even though it isn't actually validated whether they do, because validating it gets very, very hard. Because you have to transitively validate through all the functions that this function calls and the ones that they call in turn, unless they have handlers for. And you, I mean, we've even seen it in Java, which is a language that has checked exceptions, and you end up sort of pushing this ever increasing mountain of exceptions that you have to propagate to the outer functions, because you might throw all of these and then the next function up might throw more, and before you know it, you have like this enormous mess. And then you see people just like catching the top exception and ignoring it because they can no longer like keep track of what might, and then now you've actually made the program worse, right? I think where we've gotten to so far, at least, is that we now in TypeScript 4.4 in strict mode will give the proper type to exception variables, which is unknown. And then, if you want it to be more specific than that, you got to do an instance of check or a type of check or something to validate that you're holding an arrow object or whatever it is you're looking for. And so at least we've closed the hole that was there by us just giving it type any, which we used to do. It sure would be nice if we could be more precise, and I'm certainly game for us to keep looking at it. But I don't know that it could ever be sound, and that's what makes it less appealing, because there will always be caveats and there will always be sort of people misconstruing, but I said here, and then you didn't tell me what I said was wrong, right? And so it's always hard in the type checker to because now we're just making a new hole. I see Daniel's back. He might want to add to this.
I think I might have missed what you said in part, but yeah, I mean, like there's ideas that sometimes come to us, and we think about like, oh well, what about if you had a union type that was in some way open-ended, and that could help in some way, and it just doesn't really add up in terms of how we think of like the algebra of the types, how they work together, right? Like how you remove things from a union, how you know, if you check if something is in a union and then it disappears, it doesn't mean that it's gone from that type. So it's just it doesn't become logically consistent if you try to come up with these ways. But like for the same reason, I think like we would like to try to make it something that's supported that can help users. So still thinking about it, but
I think it's above my
Yeah,
pay
you
grade
see how
to
some of these
make these
things take
declarations.
5 years for us to. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's above my pay grade to declare other programming languages to have mistakes, but I feel like checked exceptions in Java were a bit of a mistake. But it was maybe the best they could do if you want to, like, because it's a side effect modeling, right? And with union types in TypeScript, like you have a place now where it's like, yeah, in Java, you have the situation where it's like, well, you have to have the same static return type. It has to be string. So now you have to, if you have like out of band conditions, like you gave me a bad argument, you have to put that as an exception, which is like this kind of out of band communication channel. But in TypeScript, you can just say, I return either a string or an error. And like now the caller has to deal with it. And it's like, there's nothing stopping you from structuring your programs such that they have the equivalent ergonomics of checked exceptions without the difficulties of modeling in the type system. So, and you see libraries like FPTS that actually do this, where it's like, yeah, you don't need exceptions because you can just put everything in the return type and make your callers deal with it as they will. So I think given that we're subject to different constraints in that way, that kind of changes the priority.
Cool. Well, I'm glad that we have Daniel back. That was a bit worrisome, just suddenly losing you. I'm not sure how long you were gone for, but it felt like a while, but then not any time at all. And so before we get to community questions, I wanted to play a little game about that exact thing. I titled this game 2021 or Just for Fun. Since time has lost all its meaning, I'm going to give you a news headline that either happened in 2020, 2021, or I just made it up for fun. And each of you will answer 2020, 2021, or just for fun. And then I will give you a point, and whoever has the most points at the end wins. Nick can't play because unfortunately I gave him the doc with the answers, so that wouldn't be fair. He'd end up like Josh and have all the points. So it happens. All right, you guys ready? You understand? And we'll go Anders, Daniel, Ryan, because that's how I set up the scorecard. Okay, are we ready? All right. This is headline number 1. In Myanmar, a girl dances on TikTok unaware that a coup d'etat is taking place behind her. 2021
I'm going to say 20.
Or you're going to say 2020, okay? Daniel.
2020.
Ryan.
Yeah, I think they're right.
No, it actually happened in February of 2021. That was this year. See? 0 points. All right. Now be careful with this one.
Still get it wrong.
Yeah,
I literally wrote 2020 on a check like last week.
I mean, it's September. That it takes a while. Just wait a couple more months and you'll get there. Also, who writes checks? What year are you in? Are you in 1976? Like, what is that?
19.
I lives in you work in Microsoft and there's all this contactless payments and you're writing checks. That is the absolute most hilarious thing I've heard. Okay. Headline number 2. Elon Musk endorses Kanye for president. 2020, 2021, or just for fun? And
Well, you never know with Elon Musk, but I'm going to say just for fun.
Just for fun.
Yeah, unanimous.
Oh, he really did. He really did on Twitter.
In 2020?
Yeah, that happened. July 2020, baby. That happened. All right. Now, this is another one to be careful for. All right, here we go. Esports, aka video games, make their debut at the Tokyo Olympics. Anders?
I believe that's true. But now the Olympics were in 21, but they were called the 2020 Olympics. So is this a trick question?
Well, what year did it happen in? All right.
21.
I don't think that happened. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I don't feel like that happened.
Okay. Ryan.
We watched a lot of Olympics at my house because we just did. And I didn't see any esports. So I'm saying that's just for fun.
That was just for fun. I made that up. That's right.
Okay.
Totally believable, though, given all the stuff they added this year. All right. A couple more left. Former Blink-182 guitarist helps get UFO videos released.
That's
Anders?
2021. Oh.
You're going to go 2021 on that, Daniel?
This is going to be this guess. Yeah, I'm going to say 21, but I'm guessing at this point.
Okay. Ryan?
Yeah, I think that happened in 21. Yeah.
That happened in April of 2020.
Really?
That was a while ago. That was a while ago.
I think I'm scalable anytime anymore.
Time has no meaning.
It just goes to show absolutely nothing surprises anyone. All right. Locusts destroy crops in Iowa. Anders.
Gosh. Has harvest happened yet? So I'm going to say 20.
Okay. Daniel.
Oh, actually, well, can I change it to 21? Wasn't this the year of the
All right.
brood?
You can change it to 21. That's fine.
I'm going to say 21. Yeah.
All right.
I'm a
Daniel.
sheep, so I'm just going to go with what he said.
Okay. Ryan.
I'm gonna claim that they were only on the East Coast because that's the only time I've heard about them. So I'll say just for fun.
So you're thinking of cicadas, and these are locusts, and they are luckily not destroying crops in Iowa, although they did do that in Africa, so I did feel kind of bad making that a just for fun after I wrote that. Yeah, but anyway, yeah,
the wrong reasons is my brand.
All right. Yeah, exactly. Okay, this is the last one, and Daniel and Ryan are tied at a pitiful 1. All right. NASA flies helicopter on Mars.
Oh, well, that for sure happened. And I believe that was 21.
Okay. Daniel.
I thought that was 2020.
Was
it feels way longer ago. Way longer ago, even though it all feels like it's the same 3 months. It's going to go 2020.
Okay, Ryan.
2021. I gotta have a different answer from Daniel, so one of us wins.
Yes, it was 21. So Ryan wins with 2 points. And time has absolutely no meaning. All right,
Ryan,
thanks for playing my game. All right, so now we're going to get on to the community questions. So I collected the last ones just before we started this, and I haven't looked since. So if you've put them in there since, I mean, you had all day. So, okay, this first one comes from Anonymous, and their location is the beach. And it says, Daniel, what's your phone number? I'm going to go ahead and say that probably wasn't meant to be there. I'm sorry. I'm going to take that out.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you after, Torrey, if this is really how you meant to ask. I don't know if this is the right venue.
Okay, it was me. It was me. Okay, I was anonymous.
I could tell.
Okay, this one comes from John R. in London. It was TypeScript innovates in the type system. Outside of functionality linked to emit, are there any ambitious things in the type space that the team have decided to avoid?
We've decided to
Good question.
Now we're going to go back to like 2021, just for fun.
I wouldn't say that we're actively trying to avoid anything. I mean, I think we don't actually really look at it. You know, our entry to the problem isn't really let's see what type systems do and what interesting things we could do in the type system. Rather, it's like, let's see what JavaScript users do in their code and how can we model that in a type system. And then we end up with constructs that might be novel and haven't appeared in other type systems before, such as, key of and index access types and map types and what have you. But it really it's really driven by observing what the community does in their JavaScript coding. And so I don't think that we're per se, like trying to avoid or actively go after any particular sort of thing in the type space.
Yeah, I would say that there was, so the question is like things that don't relate to emit, and this sort of relates to emit. But with one of the past decorators proposals, it was like this thing that kind of relied on this sort of meta system, which is like not, doesn't use values, doesn't use types, has its own like sort of almost macro system, and it would have required every JavaScript compiler to have its own sort of like interop story between files, right? So everything has to like know about every other file and how to read that, and it just seemed like it was gonna kind of go against the direction that TypeScript has moved towards over the last few years, which is to be more friendly with tools like Babel, like SWC, like ESBuild, whatever, ESLint, right? So like we've provided guidance just because we've seen why that can cause issues. I would say another thing is we've definitely backed off features once we've like implemented or we've like prototyped them or implemented them just after we've seen that it's impractical, right? In some cases we've had to roll things out of strict. In some cases we've had to actually just not do a feature because we didn't feel like it composed. So one example of this was called placeholder types. It's not really worth talking about here because it's not happening. If you're really curious, you can go on the issue tracker and read up about it. But it was meant to try to solve global conflicts between your npm packages, and it just seemed frictiony and didn't solve the problem well enough.
That's the same thing with global conflicts in general. It's very hard to solve them, and so I think we've all backed off from trying.
Yeah, I think we took the same approach. Oh my god.
I'm sorry, go on. Yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt. It's just,
No,
it's just right there.
That's really all there is to it. But we continue to think about things, and it's not, we don't give up, right? We give things a try and see how they work in practice a lot of the time, and that gives us guidance and feedback.
Cool. All right, Nick, I'll let you go with the next question.
Thank you, Torrey. The next question comes from Frank W. And it is issue, quote, support for Node.js 12.7 plus package exports has recently been commented to be a candidate for version 4.5, but it is not yet included on the list, nor on your 4.5 slide today. How are the chances?
How are the chances? About like a 50% chance of with scattered showers.
If it makes any difference, they use the pray emoji right after that. So I don't know if that changes how you guys are gonna, maybe 51%.
Adds like another 1%. I believe it plays into a broader story of. Yeah, so I mean, it plays into a broader story of Node 12 plus support. So for those who are not familiar, there's a couple of versions ago in Node, there was this support for native ES modules and how they interoperate with other parts of the Node ecosystem. And we kind of held off on that for a bit just because we wanted to see how it would all come together, just so every release of TypeScript wouldn't just have like partial support for its story of not being able to build an app, right? So now we're in a place where we're seeing more demand, we're seeing more stability, and package exports are part of the overall Node 12 story. So basically, it's a work in progress, right? We need to get it reviewed. The hope is that we can get it in for 4.5, and that's the target. And we'll do as much as we can to land it. So I'm excited about it. I would like to say it's got a good shot, but we try to make sure that things are ready when they're ready, and not just ship you something that you're going to be unhappy about. So, yeah.
Okay. JG in Brooklyn asked something that, when are we going to have curried generics? And then they did a not actual emoji, but the old school heart after that with the little carrot and the 3. And then I really had a great Ted Lasso thing I could have done here, but I just decided I was going to go ahead and leave it and just imply I had a joke there. So yeah, curried generics.
Not quite sure what is meant by curry generics. So, do you guys have any idea?
I can kind of. So like this plays into some of the what people call higher kind of types a lot of the time.
Fine. Yeah.
Which is like the idea that, I don't know if you want to speak to it, Anders.
Sure. So if by curried generics we mean higher kind of types, or the ability to pass generic types as parameters to other generic types, that's something that's sat on our list for a long time. It's not super clear how valuable it is. I think there's a small but vocal our group of people asking for it. But again, I really want for like anything that we do in the type system to be motivated by real world patterns that you cannot clearly express using our current capabilities. And it's not super clear to me that there are a lot of those that we're not currently capturing. I mean, I can sort of speculate about what higher kind of types might feel like. In a sense, like when you look at our type system now, and you saw it in a lot of the demos today too, we basically have a little pure functional programming language in our type system. And you can write utility types that process other types and compute new types from existing types, right? And there's really sort of a parallel in the normal value world and the type world. In the value world, you have values and then you have functions that operate on the values. In our type system, we have non-parametric types or non-generic types. And then we have generic types that operate on the non-generic types. Those are our functions, if you will. Those are the things that do the compute, right? Now, the thing expressively that we're lacking is the ability to represent functions first class, i.e. the ability to pass other functions to functions, i.e. the ability to pass parametric or generic types to other generic types. And it certainly has uses, and we can again look at what are the parallels in the value world, and it would be sort of the ability to abstract algorithms over various representations of collections, for example, and you could imagine something similar in the type system where you abstract mappings over various object types or array types or whatever. But it's not like super useful. And it's a lot of work. That much is clear. It definitely will dramatically complicate the type system, and generics are already quite complicated. I guess my ask would be for people to really show motivating examples. And here's this JavaScript that I cannot type unless I have higher kind of types. And if there are enough of those, then yeah, okay, maybe it's something we should think about. But I don't think we're just going to do them just for the sake of doing them.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this somewhat recently, and like to me, there's sort of two use cases, which is one is one that Anders just mentioned, which is I want a type alias of some sort that like takes another type helper and can apply that. So like you're basically passing a callback to your type, right? You're like mapping over types through type helpers, right? Which is really cool. It could be useful, but like it's very complicated, not for just users, but for implementers too. I think the other thing is there's also a class of collection libraries and things like that, and you'd think here stuff like like if you have a map, if you have like iterables that can be mapped over, and then you have like arrays that can be mapped over, and when you map over an array, that returns an array. If you map over some iterable, it returns like the actual type that you just mapped over in some way. This comes up in like JS like libraries and stuff like that. But it's slightly at odds if you think about it to think about, I don't know how you can put this. Part of the issue with higher kind of types, or like thinking about the number of type arguments that a type takes as significant, is it's a little bit at odds with structural typing, right? Not entirely, but there's like some friction where it doesn't fully match, and you have to kind of think a little bit outside of the box of like what other languages that have this functionality do, I think. So it's not as simple as I think we would like to make it out to seem. Even we're already complicated, right?
Yeah, and I mean, and you get into, and just like, I mean, you've seen the journey that we've been on with adding expressiveness to our function types, right? Where originally we did not support REST parameters or whatever, and now we actually support like variadic functions, right? And so you could imagine variadic generic type arguments, right? That allows you to pass generic types of varying arity I mean, the whole thing in a sense like just parallels itself in our type system. But it gets murderously complicated, and again, we really need to make sure that we stay grounded with motivating real world examples.
So it seems like you guys don't like just adding features for the sake of adding features, because that kind of seems like what I'm taking away from this.
Whoa. Don't put words in my mouth. No, we really try to use like user feedback and tease apart what it is that like people are really asking for.
Yeah.
And I think that lends itself to why TypeScript is so appealing. Just in my own personal thoughts on that. Next question comes from Andreas R. From Dresden, Germany. As it seems, accessing constructor property initializers from class field initializers will no longer be possible in later compilation targets with the flag use defined for class fields. Would you recommend against using this pattern in today's projects?
I think since it won't work, yes.
Have Ryan answer that one.
Yeah. The whole class field business is a bit unfortunate the way it all kind of shook out. So if I had to give guidance for people, I would just say parameter properties are maybe not worth your trouble. So maybe just don't do that, and then instead just do an explicit initialization in your constructor, because you can't have that many parameters. You can't have that many parameters if you're making like a good constructor signature anyway. So doing the initializations yourself so that you get to choose if you're getting defined semantics or set semantics. Usually you'd want set semantics in this case, so you'd want to just write an explicit initialization. That's just kind of the way to go. Not too much more to say about that, I guess. Other than that, I guess we can just all look forward to being surprised by class constructor initialization order for the rest of our lives. But that's JavaScript. It's okay.
No, there's a strong tradition of that in all object-oriented programming languages, quite honestly.
That being surprised?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Just make sure.
I mean, we all love being surprised. Christmas morning is like the greatest feeling, right? Like, what if your code was Christmas morning and you just never know what's going to happen? Like, I think that's a pretty good analogy. I mean, it is whenever I try to write code.
Yeah.
This one comes
It's a
from
little-
delete.
I just say one more
Oh,
thing.
go
Like, one more thing is like really, really, really old school guidance from like C++ is don't observe virtual behavior from your constructor. So I don't know if they're teaching that to the kids these days, but like just remember that property reads are virtual behavior. So don't do any virtual behavior from your constructor, including property reads. That's the rule that's going to keep you safe, and also the one that's going to annoy you the most.
Okay. I think the only thing they're teaching kids nowadays is how to apply for student loans. I don't think they're teaching them any of that stuff, but that's good advice too.
It's a shame.
All right. So this one was from Dilip T in India. Do you see TypeScript dominating JavaScript completely in the next 5 to 10 years? Now, before you answer that, I personally imagine some weird MMA fight where TypeScript was dominating JavaScript and there was like a fight between them. But then I had to put a face to like the people. So like obviously Anders is fighting somebody and it got really weird. And I just wanted to share that with everyone while we contemplate this question. Now go ahead and answer
that. Please answer it.
Well, I'm gonna stay out of the fight scene here.
I don't think it's a fight. I think it's just a big love fest. Like TypeScript loves JavaScript. JavaScript devs love TypeScript, or at least many of them do. For the people who don't like TypeScript, that's great. We still provide them IntelliSense and VS Code. We still love plain JavaScript devs too. So, if we get more fans, that's cool. It's run by a committee, and we'll help the committee, but we're not gonna. We don't throw our weight around, right? Like we try really, really hard not to make those kinds of decisions. As much as people have kind of asked us to, that's not what we're here for. So we're going to let JavaScript keep JavaScripting and try to provide our best help with types. I said hype there as a concatenation of help for types, which is great.
I like it.
But yeah, I don't see it as an either or.
Yeah. So it's more like an
I think
Backstreet
over
Boys
time,
kind
honestly.
of thing.
No, but really, honestly, over time, I think it's become clearer and clearer what our mission is, and our mission is to provide great type checking and great tooling enabled by types, and that's what we do. We do not see it as our job to reinvent JavaScript or absorb JavaScript or co-opt or any such thing. I mean, JavaScript is what powers this entire ecosystem, and there are many different ways to write JavaScript, and writing JavaScript with types is not appropriate everywhere. Like if all you got to do is write one line of script code, to tie together two HTML elements or whatever in situ in an HTML page, no, you don't need to write type annotations. So everything has its proper place, and it's taken us many years to get there. But I think we're not at all confused about who we're for and what our mission is.
I wrote 200 lines on a script block the other day, just regular JS. It's fine. It's great. The code eventually worked.
Sorry to hear that. No, I agree though. Right?
Oh no, I'm not on the TypeScript team, but I was gonna throw in an answer too. From my perspective, I just think that you are throwing your weight around a little bit, because in a very respectful way, like it would not be wise to not take advantage of all of the type hints that you get from the language server and the tooling, even when you're not using JavaScript. Like, I especially set that up in my editor, and everybody else does, and so you're there. You're not forcing the language onto anyone, and I think that that's the biggest superpower of it. It's there, and the language that you're using will automatically just take advantage of it.
Right. I mean, we're very hyper conscious of how how much TypeScript has grown and how much power that gives us. With great power comes great responsibility, right? So you want to make sure that you're being respectful to your users who want nothing to do with you, right? Like they're they're here for VS or VS Code or whatever, and they don't want to see TypeScript. They don't want to see, like, what are these any's? What are these generics? Why are you showing me this? And so we try to think about ways that we can leverage the work we're already doing to give people good experiences. We think about, like, who is being served or underserved by the work that we do. We think about, like, oh, but a JavaScript user would not want to see this, right? So we're always thinking about that, and kind of like Ryan said, like, we don't throw our weight around in, we're in TC39, we have representation, but we are not trying to just, like, throw a bunch of momentum against proposals if, like, they're reasonable, right? Or we barely even do that in general. We're even on team, we have, like, discussions about features where someone will say, like, well, that feels too static. It's not JavaScripty, even though it would, in theory, maybe be good for TypeScript in some way, right? So, like, we're thinking holistically. We have to not just think about the types. We have to think about the language, think about the whole experience from, like, end to end, because we've got a lot of users nowadays, and it's whether they know it or not, right? So it's all about.
So your TypeScript version 6 plan to send missionaries out door to door has been scrapped, is what I'm hearing here. Okay. It's just everyone update their roadmaps.
Speaking of the roadmap, our next question comes from Dylan G. from Arlington, Virginia. And they're asking, is there anything on the roadmap to help with performance for type checking extremely large projects like monorepos?
I would say that it's not on the roadmap per se, but we've been investing in a lot of optimizations and optimization, just analysis and infrastructure to try to help us uncover improvements. One of the challenges there is, like, especially when you've got, like, a code base and millions of lines of code or massive monorepos, like, most organizations, companies don't want to share it because it's closed source, right? That's been a challenge. We usually start from the outside and try to work our way, like, into the compiler, and then make sure everyone gets the savings. And recently we've gotten, like, kind of an interesting place where we've heard stories about, just places we could optimize for. So we've done a broader mix of, like, external code and internal Microsoft code, where, like, we're just looking at massive code bases in, like, Office or Teams or whatever, and trying to reduce build times. And we've taken what we've learned and we've put this all on, like, this one big wiki page on the GitHub wiki called Performance, right? And part of it is just to give you guidelines on, like, what's a good repo look like, how should you structure these things, what sorts of type checker pitfalls can you hit, and then if none of that helps, there's an entire section for self-help, right? So, like, maybe you'll be depressed and you'll need, like, a book on that or something for your performance issues, but, like, what I mean is, like, diagnostics for your code base, right? Like, figuring out where the slowdowns are coming from. And we found places where, like, oh, this library ships, like, megabytes of types. That's where the slowdown is coming from, because we just did a profile. We can send them a pull request. We found, like, places in our compiler where, a bunch of work is done several times over, or we could cache stuff, and we're finding so many great optimizations. So first of all, if you're not using TypeScript 4.4, a bunch of those optimizations have landed. You should try that out now. TypeScript 4.4 just went out, so do that. But if you find something that's interesting from that diagnostics on your own code base, let us know. We might be able to optimize something. We might be able to patch something. We might be able to think through a new design of some feature, right? So we want to hear from you about that. So that's my guidance there.
It looks like we have time for a few more questions. So this one comes from, if I get this name wrong, I'm probably going to, maybe Baggio. Baggio W. I always feel like the TypeScript projects I work on barely scratch the surface of what the language offers. To TypeScript experts, are there certain types of projects that could provide use cases to explore a larger surface area of the language? How do you become more familiar with advanced TypeScript features? Or advanced features of TypeScript, I should say.
I think there are certainly examples on definitely typed of some of the libraries in there that do very advanced stuff. I'm not sure I can list out precisely which ones. I think we even saw some examples today, like Gary Bernhardt's talk, I think is a great example of some advanced type usage that gives you static typing all the way through your routing pipeline, which is nifty. And there are a lot of things that have become possible that weren't possible before with some of the later features that we've added to TypeScript. But I'm not sure that there's one place I could send you. I don't know if you guys have.
I would just say, well, first of all, don't feel pressured, like after what you've seen today or recently, that like if you've seen some cool, crazy stuff, you don't have to feel like you have to learn it all, right? This is the one thing. Maybe at every TS Conf, there's maybe some really crazy cool stuff, but you should not feel pressure to like, oh man, I need to learn all of that right now, or else I'm never going to be a good TypeScript developer. That's not the thing to take away there. But we've invested a lot in our docs, right? In our handbook, and it'll tell you the fundamentals of some of these things that you've either seen today, the things that that will help you, and it gives you the building blocks to think more broadly about what you need to get, right? Like, oh, I need to change all of the properties in an object. That's a map type. Oh, I need to think about the things that this object has. Well, that's key of, right? So don't feel like you're not able to program in TypeScript until you know the full language, I think is one good thing there. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff many people attending or listening in have never used in JavaScript. And that's okay, right? Because you've still been able to write in JavaScript and not been impacted by that technology either.
Right. Our next question comes from Andrew N. in Sydney. Could we introduce an option to treat JS classes in a more strict way? Sometimes the structural types are less safe than the nominal ones.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is that so what's the question here is to try to say the question again, if you don't mind.
Sure. Could we introduce an option to treat JS classes in a more strict way? Sometimes structural types are less safe than nominal types.
There are a few tricks you can do there. One is to introduce a private member in your class, that an optional property, or just so it doesn't actually even have to be initialized or anything. It just sits there and doesn't consume any space. But the minute you have a private property in a class, you are effectively restricted to nominal typing, meaning that the only thing that's going to be assignment compatible to you is either yourself or something that derives from you, because only that will have that private member. You could not somehow have that private member by writing a structurally compatible type that isn't the class itself. So that's a trick you can use. We haven't formalized this per se in the language, so there's no way to say nominal class or whatever the modifier might be. But you can emulate it just by having an unused private member. Just like you can emulate nominal typing of primitives by having tagged primitive types that you intersect with a tag. And we do actually continue to think about ways to maybe make this manifest in the syntax, but those are the techniques that the community are using right now, and they work pretty well.
just going back a bit of the history there is that classes actually used to be nominal in TypeScript, and we found that there were a lot of problems with the way that happened. I don't want to go into the specifics of it because I think some of it may have changed based on how people use classes and sort of the modern TypeScript ecosystem. But I mean, the worst thing you can say about a proposal is we tried it. It used to work that way, and we had to change it. So now we have to convince ourselves to change it back, and that might be a safe thing to do. So it's kind of a hard sell given that that's what we wanted to do but couldn't.
Cool. Well, we have run against the time or out of time. See, time has no meaning to me. It doesn't matter anymore. But before we awkwardly throw it back to Nick by himself, I don't know how that transition is going to work, but we're going to find out. I just want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank everyone for being here, although I'll let Nick do all the thanking. I did want to give a special thanks to Ryan at SitePen for doing a lot of the work for the intro this morning. And yeah, it's been really fun. Thank you guys for joining us again to do this panel. It's been great.
Have a great rest of your 2020.